him about, his tears are streaming down my cheek, saying this is why they're failing, and he sent in an executive from New York to hear me, a 15-year-old kid, about it. And then, I went away to college to Cornell to play, but I had a part-time job with the New England T-Men, the NASL team at that time, and I used to have to come home for their games because they made me. It was pretty exciting. They made me the official scorer. I would give out assists and stuff like that at age 17. And so ultimately they told me, I used to have to take a Greyhound bus home from Ithaca, New York. So that was a long ride. But they told me that I had to, that they didn't like me showing up. They wanted me there more often. And so I would get home at like 6 a.m. on a Saturday because I'd leave at 6 at night on a Friday and then go back, the next morning. And so faced with that dilemma, I transferred. That's why I transferred back to Boston and Brandeis, because I was going to lose that job with the pro team. And then when the team ended up going to Jacksonville and I didn't move on, and after college and I had a lot of injuries, I deferred law school and I chased a dream, both playing, which I reached for a millisecond, and making a team successful. And I deferred law school and joined the real Baltimore Blast from 1982 to 84, where I lived a dream and helped make that team, still to this day, one of the most successful, has a U.S. attendance record that stands to this day. And so those are examples, 3 examples just from age 15 to 22, that I arranged my life for pro soccer. I've been a pro soccer, in this country, proselytizer my whole life. So I'm completely supportive of professional soccer making it here, and I want all leagues to make it, and I will certainly do what I can and meet with them and all that kind of thing. Now, promotion relegation. It is a complex answer. I was on the BBC a few weeks ago, and he said, let me ask you this in a lightning round question, and I said, you can't answer that in lightning rod. It is a great thing. It is what makes the game go round in the world in a lot of ways. It's enthralling. As I said before, in that May weekend, in the last week when I watched the Premier League, and a lot of people watch the Premier League, whatever league it is, La Liga, Bundesliga, people are looking to see not who wins the championship on that last weekend, but who's going to stay up and who's going to go down. It's exciting. It's dramatic. I think it's great. It's what makes the game go round. The pro-rel people have an added valid point since the U.S. lost, and that is when you play for survival every week, you get more of a cutting edge.
Sure.
As compared to when you're going to be in the top division. And I have MLS personnel that actually on the QT tell me that. And so, in other words, from particular teams. I'm not saying from the league office. And so I get that. All true. Okay? But again, I'm not a soundbite guy. And the reality is you cannot take that principle and then just snap your fingers and say, oh, yeah, we're going to have promotion relegation tomorrow.
Right.
It's absolutely impossible. You cannot divorce yourself from the economic reality of how sports is structured in this country. And there is a reality of what that is. And some people say, well, if an MLS owner leaves, so be it. Well, I'll tell you what. When I left the Baltimore Blast in 1984 and NASL folded in 1985, I was there to witness from 1985 to 1996 when we did not have a top professional league in this country, and it was a wasteland for talent. I played with a guy in Baltimore named Michael Collins, the best American player I ever played with. Very few people have probably heard of him because he made his way in indoor soccer because there wasn't anything really going on outdoor soccer. He was an American player at the time who was not a defender but an offensive midfielder who had incredible finishing and skills in front of the goal. And I think his career could have been much more significant if we had a Division I league. He was a victim of that. Like so many other players were a victim of that. And there was nowhere for fans to go either. So you can't just say, oh, big deal if MLS owners pull out. I don't want to live in that wasteland again, and none of you do either. We do not want a situation where we don't have a top league. The other thing that I would say is, and I've said this before, and you've probably heard it, but it's the true example. My first Premier League game was Charlton Athletic at the Valley, and 27,000 people marched out of the town to the Valley, and it was an incredible experience. They beat Norwich, and 4-0. I'll never forget it. And then a couple of years later, Charlton was relegated. But you know what? They get relegated to the second division, the minor leagues, whatever you want to call it, because that's what we call it here. And yet 25,000 people march to the Valley every week that next year. And why? Because it's tribal, because it's generational. And in this country, regrettably, but we're just not there yet. Soccer is not yet inculcated in the culture so well that your typical fan in Boston or Seattle or Milwaukee would automatically go in 90% numbers to those games if the team was relegated to the minor, what we'd call AAA here, or whatever, second division. And so that's a reality. And I'm not going to, for a soundbite, deny that reality. Yes, in principle, but it's going to have to, it's going to have to be studied, and it's going to have to be done correctly. And I want to tell you something. I'm representing a major international club, who I can't reveal right now, but they would be interested in starting a lower division team here in this country, and they're interested in promotion and relegation ultimately. But they, even from their distant setting, they recognize it can't happen right away. It's something for the horizon.
No, I think you mentioned something critical here, and that is the cultural aspect of U.S. soccer. But, for example, up here, so this is something I talked to Armand not too long ago about this, but I lived in Dallas. We had FC Dallas, the professional top division MLS side. Then I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where I attended the university. When it comes to soccer, it's all about the Premier League and the Champions League, and it's got nothing to do with any American league, nothing. And now, granted, there aren't any even smaller league clubs when there's something in Milwaukee that's too far away. But when it comes to Madison, you talk about American soccer, people look at you as if you're speaking a foreign language. But you say Manchester City, oh, they have a clue. And I for me personally, I've started to reveal and realize the cultural aspect is very real, and I don't know how people are going to develop that cultural aspect if the system doesn't open up, or at least have the second and third division to be allowed to flourish a little bit more, because you have this pending lawsuit with the NESL. And I want to ask you, do you have any comments on the current situation with USSF and the NESL?
I mean, it's an interesting case. I read the first brief from I shouldn't say, I didn't read it page to page from the NASL. I thought there was interesting stuff in there. I thought some of it was a little less than accurate. As an advocate stating a case, and I don't know how it's going to come down, quite honestly, and it's probably not appropriate to to comment on pending litigation. But I disagree with you that that we can't create a culture. We can't create a culture without an open system. I mean, look what's happened with the Seattle Sounders. Look what happened in Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta, it's blown my mind, because what I've always, what you've always heard about Atlanta is it's a college sports town. It's not a good pro sports town. You've had two or three NHL teams fail there. You've had, the Hawks never draw that well. Even the Braves, when they were dominant in the 90s, they didn't sell out most of their games. And look what happened this year. It's extraordinary. Hats off to all the people in Atlanta for that. And so you've got teams that are being inculcated into the cultures here, and that's not happening in an open system. In other words, they don't need it to do it. In fact, what they need is they need some sort of permanence. If you look at the history of pro soccer in this country, you've had extraordinary examples of teams having ephemeral success. You had the Cosmos draw 77,691 people to a game against the Fort Lauderdale Strikers in 1977. You had Minnesota Kicks and the Tampa Bay Rowdies drawing between 30 and 40,000, and the Seattle Sounders between 30 and 40,000 fans a game. The question becomes, can they maintain it? So when teams like the Chicago Sting, when it won a championship, everybody came to Comiskey Park. The question, though, is what happens when a team has an inevitable downturn on the field? Right? Will the fans stay? And what happened in the old days was, no, it was a fad. They didn't have time to set down their roots. Nowadays, it looks like they're setting down their roots. And so these teams need the permanence to do it. One thing I have learned, I was out in Lake Tahoe for the U.S. Adult Soccer Association AGM, and I was in my hotel room, and they have a USL team in Reno, and it was very, very cool because they got a lot of time on the sports, and they got, I saw some highlights, and they had a nice little packed attendance in a small stadium. And the reality is that what I saw was the value of having these lower division teams in smaller communities, because it does start to mirror what happens in England and other places like that, right? Where every town has their own team, and I think that's great, and it should occur. There was a time earlier in my life where I didn't think it was good because I thought it took away from the ability for pro soccer to be accepted. For instance, there was one when I came back from Baltimore. Someone came to me, and again the NSL had folded, and someone said, "Hey, will you be part of this ownership group? We're going to start this team in this lower league, and our budget is if we make 4,000 fans a game, then we'll be a success." And I was like, no, because the Boston media will not look at it like as a success at 4,000. They'll look at it like soccer can only draw 4,000. And so I was kind of against those smaller teams, but I see now the benefit in smaller communities for that kind of thing. So I champion all these leagues and all these roles. I do not think you need an open system, though, for teams in Boston, New York, and Atlanta and Seattle and Portland and all that stuff. If you manage the team right, if you have the product, a good product, if you capture the fancy and you're sincere and you have good community relations, you're going to be a success, and then you can build from there.
No, I mean, I would sorry to interrupt, but I would definitely agree on
no problem.
With you on the premise that it's a very complex issue. I've tangled back and forth because I do realize if I were an MLS owner, I'd be very scared because you've invested. I mean, for example, LAFC, what would happen if you did suddenly open the system? They just invested in a brand new stadium and they had a bad year and they go under. Well, the investment, this is something that cannot happen overnight, and it will not happen overnight. But it's a very interesting conversation.
I don't even need to comment on that. I agree with what you said just now 100%. It is a very interesting conversation, and like the client I'm representing, they get it. They understand it from there. This would be something ultimately that would be great. It can't happen right away, but I agree 100% with what you're saying.
And I also do agree with when you say about the smaller cities. I mean, we saw Louisville City, who won the USL, and you see them pack that baseball stadium, convert into a soccer field, whatever that is. But it was pretty amazing to see. I mean, we're slowly starting to see these in these USL areas. I mean, we saw it in Cincinnati, we've seen it in Sacramento, Louisville City, and I think it is a positive step towards the development of the game in this country.
I totally agree. There was a time where I didn't, but I totally agree. And by the way, I'll put a plug in for my friend Steve Livingston, who helped run Louisville City.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, he's like, well, that's not shameless because it's not for me, but I'm doing it for him. But yeah. he's a good guy. But yes, I would agree. I again 100% agree with you. There was a time I wouldn't, but now I think that it's exciting. It's actually exciting to see this stuff happen in cities like that.
I just want to quickly comment on or ask you about the women's game, because you have this quote about how if Juventus and Chelsea come in and play, they're going to lay down grass. But, the women, for example, are having to play on turf. And I think playing on turf, even, MLS standards, playing on turf is absolutely a mistake. It's terrible for the game. If you watch Seattle, it's just terrible to watch on television, too. The jerseys kind of blend with the turf. What else would you do with the women's game to help promote and grow and bring them to this, fair among the men and women?
You're talking about the women's national team or the women's game in general?
Well, I would say both.
So, I mean, the women's national team, on day one, we're going to equalize the working conditions. It's, I met with the Athletes Council in October before the Panama game, a few days before the horrific result in Trinidad. And, the common ground right away we had, it was incredible because I didn't expect walking into that room that we'd be talking about artificial turf. But it was that they had just signed the